You clean your clothes at a laundromat. You clean your prose with Editomat. Weak and wishy-washy words fill the page without advancing your story. These include words like that, which gets overused, words like nice that are so vague that they don't really tell your reader anything, and words like almost and about that actually weaken the description that comes after them. Editomat knows over 100 wishy-washy words. It'll highlight these words so you can look at them and decide which ones are helping and which ones are hurting your story. Two of the fastest and easiest ways to improve your story is to look at the wishy-washy and repeated words. Because they're so common, these are the first two buttons in the button bar. We start by driving our cursor up to the W for the wishy-washy words, and then Editomat highlights them. What very tells the reader is that you, the author, were being lazy, and instead of finding a really good adverb or adjective, you found one that was kind of wishy-washy and you threw very in front of it to make it sound more intense. Slowly is a wishy-washy word because it's overused. It doesn't really convey as much information as you might like. You can use a more vivid word. Sluggishly, it's a little bit more vivid, gives a better feeling. Rather than just change those words, this might flag us that we should rework the sentence. For instance, we can say he procrastinates. That's a feeling that we all know, and it helps the reader identify with the person in the story. Many is a vague word. It could be 6 or 10 or 10 million. In this case, we don't really need the word because anything over a year is a long time, so years is good enough. Actually is a useless word. It assures the reader that we're telling them the truth, but the reader is already suspending disbelief, or otherwise they wouldn't be reading our story in the first place. About is on the weak word list because the most common usage is actually damaging to your story. We'll write, he was about 5 years old, or it was about 10 miles into town. When your characters speak, they can be vague. When you're writing, you should be precise and declare that something is real. Say it's 9.7 miles to town if it matters. If it probably doesn't, so you can just say it was 10. The reader won't care. In this case, about is to say that the book was about a person, and that's a legitimate use of the word about, so it should remain in here. Really is either like very, saying that the word after this is not as cool as it could have been, or it's like actually, with the author assuring the reader that they're telling them the truth. In either case, we don't need that word. Really. Bad, nice, good. These are all words that are so vague that they don't really have meaning. Instead, we might say that our character was a nasty man. Or we might say that he was a mean man. Both of these are more vivid than just plain bad. As a matter of fact, honestly, truly, actually, again, these are assuring the reader that we're telling them the truth, and the reader already is believing us at least enough to read the story. These can all just be wiped. We don't need the word seemed that if we're telling the reader what is real in the context of the story. What we say is what's real. We could only use seemed that if we're flagging the reader that our main character has been confused and isn't seeing what's really there. Everything in a story happens suddenly. It never happens until the reader reads it, and once they read it, it happened just now. So suddenly is another word we can just remove. Different is another word that we probably don't need. He was in 4 songs. He was in 4 different songs. Of course he was in 4 different songs. He couldn't be in 4 the same songs. He decided to turn off the stereo. Unless your character is J. Alfred Prufrock, he should not decide, he should do. Give your characters action. Let them be. Let them do. Turned is vague because we often use turned when the character reacts to something. He turned at the sound of a gunshot. Jerked or jumped would be more active. In this case, turned is inaccurate because he turned off his stereo, and powered is a little bit more descriptive. And finally, we get to sound. Sound is considered a weak word because we so often say, he heard a sound, and that doesn't tell the reader anything. He heard a gunshot. He heard a baby cry. He heard a footstep in the dark. Those give the reader an idea of what's going on. In this case, sound is part of the Sounds of Silence. It's a title, and it's a legitimate word. What Editomat tells you is things that you should look at, not necessarily things that are wrong, but things that you want to make sure you're doing deliberately, not accidentally. That cleans up the weak words, so we'll move our cursor up to the bleach bottle and get rid of the highlights, and now we'll take a look at what we can do with repeated words. Words can be repeated for effect, like the bells, bells, bells in Edgar Allan Poe's poetry here. More often, especially in a rough draft, we repeat a word because we got this word stuck in our head, and we just use it over and over again, whether we really need it or not, and Editomat helps us find those. We start by driving the cursor up to the R for repeated words. The first word in a repeated set is highlighted blue, and the last word is highlighted with a salmon color. These colors can be configured from the Edit Preferences button. The first repeated word we see is Paul. There's nothing wrong with using his name twice, but we can reuse a pronoun. It makes things just a little bit simpler. The word right is also repeated. Again, there's nothing wrong with using the word write, but we already know that he wrote the book from the first time it's used. The second time doesn't tell us anything. We can change that to complete, and now it tells us a little bit more that he's finished a book as opposed to just started. Books is a problem, because we not only use the word book twice, but we also use it a third time with a different meaning. Using the same word with two different meanings is a great way to confuse your readers. So we can change one of those to story. That's easy enough. Instead of books a trips, perhaps he'll reserve a trip, or he might decide to charter his trip. Or he might even decide that he's going to he'll decide that he's going to sign up for his trip. And then off he goes onto his yellow submarine. The man didn't want to be in a story. The man wanted to be alone. He wanted to be alone with Eleanor Rigby. This could be repetition for effect, but it's more likely repetition because we just got those words in our head and we use them over and over again. This was a rough draft. This could be a flag to us that what we really want to do is not just do a cleanup on these individual words, but it's time to rework the entire sentence. So instead, he planned to be alone in his nowhere land with Eleanor Rigby. This finishes up a week in wishy-washy word and a repeated word analysis. The language is more powerful, and there are no longer sing-songy sections. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this lesson useful. You can download Editomat from www.editomat.com.